So typically when we're thinking about tabletop role-playing games, we often categorize the structure of a campaign as either being a railroad or a sandbox. And a campaign which is on a railroad track is one which is very linear nature. The game master has this very elaborate story in mind, and he expects the players to interact with these narrative beats in a very procedured manner. And then upon the conclusion of the campaign, there's some sort of grand finale, there's this big climax, and all roads lead to there, okay? And then on the other end, you have the sandbox. And the sandbox is one wherein the game master is creating their world, they are creating the people and places within the world, and then they're trying to breathe life into the world and allow the players to interact with it without trying to coerce them to do one thing or another. And while probably everyone has played the former campaign, the one that is very linear, and has probably even enjoyed those kinds of campaigns at some point or another, I find that the latter campaign, the sandbox campaign, is a lot more satisfying. And that is true for both the players and the game master. And I think the most obvious criticism of the very linear campaign is that it oftentimes robs the players of a certain amount of agency, and sometimes significantly so. Because the game master has already decided how everything's going. He has written his story, and the players, regardless of what they do, they are going to be participating in his story the way that he wants them to. It doesn't matter what the players do. Ultimately, that big, cool final battle, that big climactic scene that the game master has in mind, we're getting to that point. And again, that really is, it robs the players of immersion because they want to believe that their choices that they make, that their characters are making, actually has some influence on the game, has some influence on the world, that they can shape the events which affect their characters in some way. And I said earlier that sandbox games are not just more satisfying for players, but they're more satisfying for the game master as well. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that if you are planning every session out, and when you go to play the game, you have already in your mind decided how all the events are going to play out, there is no ability to have that same level of improvisational fun that the players are having. You're not actually interacting with the players in a way in which makes sense. You're not feeding off the players and then making decisions and then having the players kind of react to what you're doing and then going back and forth. And I think that's a shame because as a game master, I don't necessarily want to know exactly how every session is going to play out. I have certain things in mind. I'm trying to prepare and plan and think about, okay, what is probably the most likely thing that my players are going to do so I can be sort of prepared for it. But I don't want to necessarily just say like, this is the story we're playing tonight. A good example of kind of thinking on your feet and being able to make adjustments on the fly is right now my players are playing in a campaign of Streets of Peril where they are part of a criminal syndicate. And there's this rival gang in town that they are trying to push out of town or disrupt their trade and basically create a monopoly of controlling crime in the city. And so they discover that this rival gang has this like safe house in town, and they have received information that there's probably some valuable stolen items inside of there. And so what the players do is instead of just kind of rushing in to attack this safe house in a way which could potentially be dangerous because who knows, that information they receive could just be trying to get them to run into a trap. What they do is they get rooms at an inn which is nearby this old rundown house in the city. And from the tavern, they are kind of keeping an eye on the house in a way in which doesn't look overly suspicious. They're trying to see who's coming in and out of this house. Well, as time goes on and nothing is happening, two of the players decide, let's go to the enemy territory and let's see if we can't see if there's any enemy movement there, and then try and maybe shadow them, potentially following them back to this safe house. Well, unfortunately, the players fail their perception checks, their stealth checks, and their disguise checks. And because these rolls are all opposed rolls, the players don't know whether or not they're having success or not. They roll, I roll in secret, and so they're not really certain if, I'm calling for a roll which is not necessary just to kind of throw them off guard, or if they're failing these rolls. But ultimately what ends up happening is the players sort of get that sinking feeling of, uh-oh, we've been rolling and nothing is happening, and that's potentially a bad thing. So after a period of time where they don't discover any enemy agents, any enemy gang members walking around through this territory, they decide to head back to the tavern where the rest of the party is. But unbeknownst to them, they are now the ones being shadowed. Some gang members up on the rooftop who've been, keeping a watch on this area, they alert some of their buddies, and now the whole party is now surrounded by all of these gang members. And they don't know that yet. So now they're in the tavern and they're deciding, okay, what are we going to do? We haven't seen anyone leave this house. We haven't seen anyone enter this house. And they get frustrated and they decide, you know what? When it gets really dark, we're going to go through the front door. We're going to go attack this place. So they enter the safe house and they leave their wizard outside because they want to keep him safe. But as soon as all the party goes into the house, the crossbowmen, who they didn't see because they all failed their perception checks, they just riddle the wizard outside who's standing in the street with crossbow bolts, and he's out of commission right away. And before the players can go back and try and deal with him, the windows are exploding, glasses flying, and then there are all of these gang members rushing into the house, surrounding the party, and now there's this awful melee inside the house, including one of the big criminal bosses that are part of this enemy gang. And this is a really rough fight for my players. I think I know I had one for certain death, and I think I may have even had 2 deaths, and the players barely escape out of there. And at the end of the game, the players are obviously, they're a little frustrated because they got their asses kicked. But I explained to the players, I said, look, I wasn't expecting to ambush you guys tonight. I did not have this combat encounter planned at all. I was, this is not the way I expected the game to go. But you guys went to the enemy territory, and as you guys were, and I didn't expect you guys to do that. And as you guys were there, I was thinking, okay, are there going to be sentinels? Or are there going to be people watching the turf? And I said, yeah. And then we rolled to see what, if there was going to be any interaction, if you guys were going to identify the sentinels up on the rooftops, and you guys didn't. So then I thought, okay, so if they saw you guys, and you guys were just in a tavern fight at the enemy territory's turf, like the night before, like you guys are pretty easy to identify. If that's the case, and they identify you guys, and they see you walking through the turf and then leaving, what are they going to do? Well, they might follow you. And if they follow you guys back to their safe house where you guys are all gathering up, they might suspect that, hey, these guys are going to attack our safe house. And then they reacted accordingly. And when I explained it to my players that way, they were like, oh, yeah, okay, that makes sense. And I think that is way more enjoyable. It makes the world actually feel real. It's not just me coming up with a pre-planned story. It's the players are doing something. I'm thinking about what's going on in the world, how is the world interacting with the players, and then the players are feeding off of that. Okay, so now as a game master, you've decided, I want to run a sandbox campaign. You create your world, you drop your players in it, and they don't know what to do. They are so used to having some sort of direction offered to them by the game master and being pushed in a certain direction that they don't know what to do when it's a campaign that is purely player driven. And that can be a really hard mindset shift for certain players who aren't used to this kind of play. So one of the things I did for Streets of Peril to address this is I offered a mechanical incentive for the players to be thinking about their goals and how to achieve those goals. So every character in Streets of Peril has to declare 3 ambitions. One of those ambitions is shared by the entire party, which helps incentivize some kind of collaboration with the party. There's a reason for them to be sticking together and adventuring together. As long as a character is doing something during a session to try to advance one of their ambitions, they get experience for that night. If a character actually accomplishes an ambition, they get even more experience. And what we found through playtesting is this really did help offer players direction without being coerced. And then on top of that, when we did the last printing of Streets of Peril, we offered some additional advice for the game master for how they can have a dialogue with their players when the players are trying to think about ambitions to make those ambitions work better for the game. And by that I mean this. There are times when a player, when they're thinking about what is my character's ambitions, they struggle with either coming up with ambitions which are too easy or too difficult. And the problem with an ambition which is too easy to accomplish is the players are going to accumulate experience very quickly because you get a big lump of experience each time you actually accomplish an ambition. And so we try to encourage the game master and the players to think about an ambition which would realistically take about 8 to 12 game sessions to satisfy. And then we don't want necessarily having ambitions which are too difficult because then realistically the likelihood is they're never going to actually accomplish it. Now you could still have really interesting games with overly ambitious goals. So like if a player said, my character's goal is to become elevated to godhood, the game master may say, I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't know how likely that is to happen in the world. I don't know if you're actually going to be able to do that. If the player still says, well, that's my character's goal, you could still have tons of really interesting adventures which spring from the fact that this character is trying to become a god. And at the very least, he's still always going to be able to get some experience because every night when he's going to this lost temple of a dead god, or he's going to some ancient library looking for tombs on how people have been elevated to godhood in the past, he's going to get some experience for trying to pursue that ambition. But he'll never probably be able to get that big, large lump sum of experience for actually accomplishing that ambition, which, in all honesty, if you accomplish the ambition of becoming a god, I think the experience you got from that would be kind of who cares. But that's something to think about as the game master and as the player. Like, what are your ambitions and how well do they fit in thematically with Streets of Peril? So then on top of it, I offer different kind of stereotypical ambition ideas. Like probably one of the most obvious and easy one is defeat the antagonist, right? There's the big bad evil guy. He does bad things. We want to defeat him. So, you don't want to make an ambition like that in such a way wherein the players can just go kick down the front door of his stronghold, beat him up, and yay, we won, we saved the day. So you may have it so there are sub-goals that need to be realistically accomplished before that antagonist can be defeated. And those goals are what the players come up with. Like, you don't need to have this very rigid idea of like, the players need to go and steal supplies from this wagon train, and then they need to go over to this silo where all the food stores are for this enemy garrison, and they need to go and burn that to the ground. Like, you don't need to come up with all these things. Let the players think about, like, have them gather intelligence, have them try and figure out, like do surveillance and figure out how does the enemy stronghold set up. Let them think about what are we going to do to stabilize the power that this enemy has so that we can ultimately defeat them. That is way more fun than you, like, every night you're going like, the goal for tonight is The players are going to do this. No, let them figure it out. And so with the introduction of these ambitions into your game, whether you're playing Streets of Peril or you're playing another game, I would just say that using ambitions in your game, having the players to actually think about what is my character's goals, like what does my character want to do, that makes it so much easier that each night when the characters are, again, remember the goal of the player is to think about put themselves in the place of their character and think about what their character wants to do. Now they have direction. It's not a really like kind of weird coercive, like we're on the railroad tracks and this is what we're doing tonight. It's a very intuitive kind of direction that the players are coming up with themselves, and they are being motivated each night to continue trying to advance their ambitions, pursue their goals.